Yeah. I know. I've still got to hit another couple of buttons before I show up on camera. I get that. Hi, we're a half hour early because of things. John here, you there. And I was telling our first guest who's going to be here momentarily that we're probably going to break the sound barrier today and go for 3 hours because we have that much going on, because of this World Cup thing and having all of the reaction and getting ready for the world that doesn't stop. And so it's like a review and a preview and it's a bunch of things. So here's the rundown quickly so we can go to our first guest. All right. So first guest, obviously, he's first. That's coming up in a sec. 9:05 under the normal start time. Kennesaw State's Dr. Leonard Jackson, who is a professor in hospitality management. He's going to look at the World Cup impact for Atlanta from the hospitality perspective, saturation, how many hotel rooms, what it means, what you learn, all that kind of stuff. And we get his feedback because he's a soccer guy too. We'll find out what he thinks about the champ. 9:30, we're going to hear from Braden Dunham. Caught up with him at camp yesterday in Utah as the U.S. YNT is getting ready for the CONCACAF U20s. I think they're heading down to Mexico today. It serves as qualification for the U20 World Cup. U.S. gets Haiti in Puebla on Saturday night. So that's at 9:30. 10 o'clock means that KCD drops by. Casey White's going to join us before she hops on a plane. We may talk everything from NWSL to MLS to whatever's on her mind because she was host at a conference in the Northeast, and I think she actually got to see the last game of the World Cup. So that's 10 o'clock. 10:30, we check in at Notre Dame. Dr. Michael Morris, Morehouse professor Howard Jean Denis on the Urban Poverty and Business Initiative and the local Aspiring Community Entrepreneurs Program. Support from Coca-Cola has helped that out. We find out how that impacts Atlanta. And then at 11 o'clock, Tuskegee women's soccer head coach Emmanuel Stevens lets us know what it's like to build a program from scratch. There's your guests. Here's speaking of batting leadoff, Will Palaszczuk, Willie P. How are you, partner?
What's going on, John? I hope that I get as close, if not closer, to a World Cup final than I was on Sunday, because I was actually in New Jersey during the final for a family event, and I had to fly out of Newark Airport while the final was going on. No, thankfully, I got to see the whole thing.
Okay.
But at the same, my flight was actually, to make a short story long, it was a 7:30 flight that didn't go off until 11:30, which again is a whole nother story in American aviation. But I'm sitting there and I'm watching the second half and extra time in a bar that's got a bunch of Spanish fans and a lady in behind me who's standing up praying in Arabic saying, "Please Messi, please Messi, please God, please Messi."
Wow.
So I had the dichotomy in stereo. And when it's interesting when you're in an airport, all the airport restaurants or whatever are on different feeds.
Mm-hmm.
So I think ours was the first. So we saw the Spain goal first.
Oh no!
And then the restaurant over here sees it, and then you hear them cheer, and then the restaurant at the top of it was a surreal feeling.
Oh God.
But yeah, no, we had a family thing up in New Jersey this weekend that I did not realize. You know how one brain works and the other brain doesn't want to communicate.
I would have to have.
I'm thinking, I'm sitting here and thinking, why in the world did this flight cost more than $1,000? Why was this hotel so hard to procure? And then I'm sitting there Thursday night and talking to my wife, and I said, "Honey, I'm so stupid. It's the same weekend as the World Cup final." And she's like, "Yeah, I realized that a couple of days ago. Why did it take you so long?" I'm like, "Because I got 3 different things going on. 5,000 baseline stressors, but I'm excited because we're back tomorrow night. I'm very, very happy."
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm right there with you. My golden retriever brain's bad enough as it is. And then to be discussing, World Cup and Major League Soccer and the U20s and what have I forgotten? Look, I'm going to break the fourth wall. No, I never do that on the show. Exactly. Here's some of my notes for the morning. There's some of my notes. There's some of my notes. And then that's on one. And then obviously time codes on another. Obviously one device open here, second device open here, caffeine off to my right, notes behind me. So if I find all my notes in my sequence for the show today, I'm in great shape.
It's okay. I have 2 days. I have 2 days ago's caffeine sitting next to me off screen. So there's
go.
That.
Man, that's strong. We brought you in here to talk about Charlotte.
Sure.
So everyone, it looks like. Well, actually, let's go with the exceedingly generic question off the top. How was the World Cup break for resting folks and assemblage and getting everything squared away for this run before we get into other runs here at the end of this season?
Well, Charlotte did kind of limp to the finish at the end of the pre-World Cup portion. They were dealing with a couple of injuries in the back line. Harry Toffolo was hurt, and then his replacement ended up getting a red card in Charlotte's final game. Toffolo is back, which is encouraging. He played full 90 minutes in Charlotte's friendly last week against Austin. That was a closed-door affair. They also did not have Nathan Byrne available to them at the end, and so it forced the full debut of Will Cleary, somebody who I think Charlotte's very, very high on, the kid out of Stanford. Very, very smart kid, and I think he had a very admirable debut, but I think asking too much out of him too early would be something that might derail him a little bit. So it was good to get Nate back. There were a couple of guys who picked up some nicks and niggles over the course of the time that they were getting back to ramp up. Edon Toklamati was dealing with a bit of a hamstring injury, but he was back in full training when we saw him yesterday. And Nath also still trying to get himself back full off the hamstring injury, but he was back in full training as well. As far as everybody else goes, the only real injury to Charlotte right now is Aaron John took a really, I think, gross shoulder injury during the break. They're hoping to that it heals without surgery. It's one of those things that kind of was a freak accident that took place during training over the break. That's really the only injury really to speak of. David Schnegg is dealing with a groin, but he's not even eligible for Wednesday's game anyway, so he's not necessarily a high concern in Charlotte's plans. And the only other real absence is an unfortunate one for Charlotte, and their new signing, Alan St. Maximin, is still working through the diplomacy, as it were, because sometimes some teams get visas quickly, and sometimes some teams' visas don't get visas quickly. I don't know why the rhyme or reason is for it, but it is one of the things we have to deal with in this league. But Charlotte adds a really dynamic player who at some point will contribute for Charlotte FC in a great deal, we hope. But doesn't look like he's going to be on the field for us tomorrow night in Uptown.
At some point, he'll contribute. It's a contribution to be named later.
At some point.
Yes, because of the in of Alan St. Maximin, that meant there was an out. And sure. when you look at, I guess I don't know if legacy is the right word, but I guess just the time spent from Wilf Zaha in Charlotte, how would you characterize it with him now out back to Europe and St. Maximin coming in at some point?
I would call it complicated, to say the least. And I think it's almost kind of the story of a lot of our designated players. When you think about, Karol Swiderski came in here and I think performed admirably as our first DP. I don't know if he had necessarily the personality to have that on his shoulders. And this is something that our GM has talked about a lot. He is a fan of being able to spend unlimited money on players, but he's not a fan of what the designated player tag does to some players. And I don't think that was necessarily the case with Wilfried Zaha. I just think that where Wilf's game is and where he thinks his game is are in two different places. And I think this is something that every footballer goes through. He's going to be 34 in November. The tricks and moves that he made when he was in his prime at Crystal Palace are things that he probably can't do now. And he found himself a lot of times within 2 and 3 defenders trying to do things that bordered on the crazy for even the youngest of players and in prime of players. And the being fouled a lot was something that, while at times it was a weapon, at times it was Charlotte's worst enemy, because it let out the venom that was the Zaha temper. And, I found it interesting when we were talking with St. Maximin, for example. Somebody asked him about Zaha being fouled as much and whether or not that attention will come to him. And St. Maximin, and I'm paraphrasing here, he said something to the effect of, hey, I know when I got 3 dudes around me, I got to pass the ball. And that's because somebody's open. So if I got to do that and it helps us win, I'm good with it. And he said, my job's not to get fouled. My job's to make people miss. So it's one of those things where I think he maybe brings on a fresher attitude than Wilf Zaha did. I think Zaha's belly aching with the referees did kind of wear on fans, and it brought them to think about Enzo Capetti's time here. And to be clear, neither player is in the same stratosphere in terms of ability. I think we saw Enzo Capetti bellyache and whine and not really put up the numbers. Zaha put up numbers, at least in his first season. I would say the numbers kind of trailed off a little bit, unfortunately, in the first half of this year. He didn't see the goal contribution that I thought you would see in the first half of the season, and I think that's what led to the conversation being had about, hey, you know what? We want to get you back at a certain level, but in terms of what you're going to be at age 34, the last thing Charlotte FC wants to be doing is paying a designated player who's a diminishing asset. And so they wanted to get younger at the position. I think they parted amicably. There is a rush of South American teams that are trying to vie for Wilf Zaha's services. And then I saw a report this morning that a couple of EFL championship teams have kicked the tires on Zaha. I think there's a reason you haven't seen him, you haven't seen a big rush of teams necessarily to sign him right away, because I think the valuation, or his valuation of where he thinks he is probably not on par with where the market sees him at this point. So I wish him well, but I think St. Maximin's going to do things that I think maybe fit this league a lot better, because this league, as you know, John, it begs you to take on defenders. And if there's one guy who knows how to do that, it is Alan St. Maximin, with the way that he is an incredible dribbler. He's one of the most dynamic take-on players that we've seen in the world. His numbers rank up there with Messi and Neymar in their primes when it comes to take-on winnability. The biggest question when it comes to him is, will the counting stats look like a designated player's counting stats? Because that's the one thing that's kind of been the issue with me seeing him in the past, is that he doesn't put up the big, heavy goal numbers that some of the other DPs have come into this league look like. But the thing I love that he said was that he wants to be a club legend. He wants to be somebody who creates a legacy with this club. He's coming here on a 3-year contract, which is one of the largest contracts ever given to a Charlotte FC DP. And he says, I want to be here beyond that 3-year contract. He could be somebody who is kind of in the vein of a Hani Mukhtar, somebody who was a, overlooked and not necessarily as known player coming into this league, and somebody who takes the league by storm. Charlotte has not really had, outside of Pep Biel, that one designated player who has staying power. They've had a lot of movement in terms of people coming in and out of that position, in what our GM calls the hardest position to field in an MLS roster.
So then what I would posit, we talk a lot about, and this, you and I talk about it a lot. We talk about it here at STH, the idea of positional gravity. And Alan St. Maximin mentions that in the conversations and the back and forth that you've had, that I think that DP numbers can come at you in two ways. I think that obviously a DP number, and like I said, this is in massive quotations, underline, exclamated, bold-faced, italicized, pick your font. Where if you're the DP and you're getting an ish load of goals and you're making a lot of goal contributions, then I think it can come at you in two ways. I think that because of positional gravity, you can help out others and boost their numbers. But I know that we gravitate toward the idea of a DP sitting there going, well, his numbers stink, but you got to look at the context of it all. If he's helping out the others around him, I think that your DP-ness is just as effective. Who would benefit the most, you think, from positional gravity when Alan St. Maximin walks in the door?
I mean, Idan Toklamati is the first thing that comes to mind for me, and that's somebody that was name-checked by Zoran Cornetta, our GM, when we talked to him about the signing. He said, look, if Alan St. Maximin is going to get double digits in goals or double digits in assists, that's fine and well and dandy, but we need multiple guys to do that across our thing. We don't have a guy who we think is capable of having a 20-goal season and winning the Golden Boot. They want to be a team that gets contributions from multiple different assets. And I think any team is wanting to do that. And, whether that's Kerwin Vargas on the other side, who's benefiting from long switches from Alan St. Maximin, whether that's Pep Biel losing some attention that is paid towards him because people are dazzled by what St. Maximin does on the ball. And so I think it comes down to the fact that what he's able to do is going to draw attention. Now, will that attention result in him scoring goals? They believe so. Will it result in him getting assists on goals? They're believing that that's probably going to be more so the case. He's probably going to have a higher assist number than goals number, and I don't think they're upset about that, because you have Toklamati, who's a brilliant finisher in front, who does a lot of thankless running. You've got Pep Biel, who's also probably the best finisher on the team. And I think also the biggest thing, and I think this is what maybe informs Charlotte FC's next move, is can they find another body to be inside the box, whether that's the person who plays Jabril Gianni's position or Jabril Gianni himself, whether that's Ashley Westwood joining the fray a lot more as well. They have not had, really, in the 5 years that I've done these games for them, they've not had the person to provide really consistent service with the support on the back end to be able to get the finishing that they really want to score the kind of goals it takes to win in this league. As we know, this league is a goal scoring league. It's not a defensive, win 1-0 and hope to goodness gracious you can suffer and defend for 90 minutes. As much as Dean Smith says we want to be difficult to beat, the offensive talent in this league is in the front of the field, and I think he understands that, and I think they understand that they need to be more threatening and more clinical on target. They need to be able to get more chances and result in those chances. And I think too, St. Maximin will allow, I think, the other pieces on this team to maybe breathe a little bit more freely, most awfully, and also it will also give him a chance to resuscitate his career, because if you know anything about the way his career has gone over the course of the last year and a half, he was at Fenerbahce after leaving Newcastle for Saudi Arabia because he had to leave Newcastle because of the financial fair play restrictions that had unfortunately enveloped that club. So he goes to Saudi Arabia. He goes to Fenerbahce. It falls apart under Jose Mourinho. He goes to Club America. Apparently, there was some sort of racist type stuff happening with him and his kids while he was at Club America. So he left there quickly, went to play a half year at Lens in France. Felt like he rediscovered something there. They won the Coupe de France, and it almost kind of feels like this is coming in the same vein as a lot of Charlotte FC's designated players, somebody who was a depressed asset who can kind of regain and reclaim some form. Pep Biel has done that. Wilfried Zaha did that to a certain degree, and they're hoping the same thing can happen here with St. Maximin and Charlotte.
Okay, so you mentioned Kerwin Vargas. I was looking on the interwebs, which we always know 100% of the time is that bastion of journalistic integrity. And I was seeing that there was the possibility that Kerwin Vargas might be being looked at by Atletico Paranaense as a part of the ins and outs here in this window. You mentioned what needs to be done from a front office perspective. Have you heard anything about this Kerwin Vargas idea or anything else?
I've seen the same reports you have, John. We keep asking the front office, we keep asking Dean Smith about Kerwin Vargas. Nothing is done. He is at training. He is expected to feature on Wednesday. Some of the reports that I keep seeing mention that Kerwin probably is being allowed to stay here a little longer. And again, that's from the outside reports. That's nothing I'm hearing inside the building. But I think a lot of this comes down to Charlotte's roster's full right now, and their season is restarting. And the last thing that they want to find is themselves between a rock and a hard place, because they already lost one winger and Wilfried Zaha. The second winger that they brought in has not been cleared by visa with St. Maximin. So in terms of that they do not want to find themselves with their pants down, so to speak, to try and make sure that they can still win games. So I think it's a situation of they're probably waiting for St. Maximin's paperwork to clear, maybe trying to identify another winger. There's also, the curious case of Liel Abada, who was shopped around, at least reportedly, around a bunch of EFL championship level teams and some other teams across the European side as well, as somebody who, quite frankly, would bring Charlotte FC the most bang for their buck in terms of being able to sell him and bring in a designated player who can contribute at a higher level. So I think there's that evaluation process going on right now in terms of, hey, do you bring in another right winger? Do you go and bring in a DP attacking midfielder / box-to-box midfielder? I think right now it comes down to if there is a deal that's done with Kerwin Vargas, it's not done because Charlotte hasn't figured out how they're replacing him on the roster, first off, and also what they're trying to do business-wise with Liel Abada potentially, because of the fact that when it comes down to it, because of his DP slot, he will bring in, obviously, a player of a different caliber.
Any clue how much within the league, and this is the Garber Bucks question, any clue how much navigating you have when it comes to Garber Bucks and Gam and Tam and sliding all that stuff in? Because we can talk DPs all day, and as long as Charlotte's 3-3, right? Or are they 2-4?
3-3, yes.
Okay, so Charlotte's 3-3, and I mean by that is, for those just hanging in, 3 DPs, 3 U22s.
And those are all full.
Right. So how much GAM space is there to help navigate buying folks down if you need to, that kind of stuff? How much financial navigability is there? Wow, I pulled that word out. How much how much navigating is there? How much breathing room is there when it comes to bringing in players and figuring out how they would all fit under the cap?
There is not a lot of room based
Yeah.
on the last look that we got from the roster profiles. They were not in as dire a situation as they were, say, at this point a year ago. They used their last available GAM last year at the basically primary transfer window deadline because of, once again, it seemed problems at the back. They had to go and get Jaquil Marshall-Ruddy after the neck injury to Nathan Byrne, and they basically used their last available GAM to get him on a loan. Charlotte had at the check at the end of the 2026 primary transfer window, they had $75,000 available in GAM, so that's not a lot.
Mm-mm. Wow, that really means that your capologists and your front office really got to know what they're doing. Will Palaszczuk joining us as we broadcast from the Kaiser Permanente studios here, breaking everything down when it comes to Oppo Research and Charlotte and the matchup coming up tomorrow in the midweek. You mentioned defense, so let's go defense. Christian Kalina continues to stand on his head, and I'm hoping that he's okay with all the blood rushing down as it always does with all the saves that he makes by standing on his head. When you've stared at this defense and the back line this season, what has stood out to you? And have you had any thought bubbles and or questions about what you've been seeing? Because, right now, middle of the pack in the Eastern Conference.
Well, the thing about it is, John, the defense is not at where it was 2 years ago when Kalina was the goalkeeper of the year. So that part of it was, I think, a little bit jarring to see. We all kind of wondered what it was going to look like without Adilson Malanda. And they brought in a player who I think is really, really nice in Morrison Ajiman. He came in relatively raw, but he's learning on the job. And both the front office and head coach Dean Smith have opined that they probably had to play him a lot quicker than they wanted to because they never got Henry Kessler healthy during the first half of the season. He was expected to be somebody who contributed and was that right side defender alongside Tim Ream. I will say Tim had an uneven first half. I think there were moments of brilliance alongside some of the moments like we saw in the U.S. men's national team game where, backtracking is not Tim's forte. As long as he keeps the player in front of him, I think he's definitely still solid. And his distribution of the ball is about the best you can have from anybody in the back line in the league, or the best line on his team, I should say. So from that part of it, I think is really, really good to see from him in terms of a leadership standpoint. But at the same point in time, you wonder just how much of a shelf life is left on the U.S. men's international. So I think the center back thing is just still something they're working through. I'm wondering, with the congestion of matches, they're going to play 8 games between Leagues Cup and the league schedule in the month of August. You're definitely probably going to see Henry Kessler play at some point. Andrew Privet has still been fighting it a little bit. I will say he looked better in the last game we played before the break against New England than he had at any point in time really before that. He had a couple of games in the opening portion of the season that did not cover himself in glory, and that was what kind of led to instead of using Privet at the right side defensive position, using Morrison Ajiman, and Morrison has been so good that he's basically not been knocked out. The injury to Harry Toffolo, I think, also messed with some things as well. While I love David Schnegg as a player, and I thought that was a shrewd move getting him off waivers, he's, I think, more offensively oriented than Toffolo is. I think Toffolo is a better all-around fullback. And Nathan Byrne, I think, also, too, has had some moments where maybe the age is catching up to him a little bit. And he was also, again, hampered with a hamstring. So I think they're still trying to figure it out. They're still trying to put it together. I think Kalina has been asked to do a lot. He has not had what I would consider to be the blunder type moments en masse. There have been a couple that you would point out and say, oh, he was in the wrong position. I don't want to say he's had a full howler to say this, so to speak, but there have been a couple of moments where you look at it and say maybe he is suffering the barrage of shots is probably giving him a little bit more than he can handle. I think also I find it curious that after a couple of years where it felt like he was maybe a snub for the All-Star game, Dean Smith does not select him when he has the opportunity to do so, and I think that's indicative of the fact that while his save number is high, I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that they just have not been as solid defensively as Dean Smith's teams in his first couple of seasons have been here at Charlotte.
But then how much of that is what's in front of him and how much of that is Kalina and just everything that's been at him for the last couple of years?
It's more what's in front of him, I think. And again, like I said, he hasn't played poorly. I wouldn't say he's played poorly. I just think, again, a lot of times, the numbers and metrics are where they are. He's only had 2 clean sheets this season. So I think it comes down to the fact that there have been times where he has bailed his guys out, which I think is incredibly indicative of how our season has gone. I think they have been as good as he can be, and as good as they are at denying chances. I think also the part of this that comes down to it is that we just don't see a lot of the ball. And so that puts a lot of pressure on what has to happen in terms of Charlotte FC suffering a lot. They have not been as good in the midfield, John, at taking the ball off opponents, whether that's by design from Dean Smith or whether that's by, a lack of aggressiveness from the players on the pitch and not getting the missive from the touchline. I think it's a situation where they need to come out of the gates in this second half a lot more aggressive because they do need to find a way to relieve some pressure off Kalina and relieve some pressure off that defense, because I think they are being made to play a heck of a lot more suffering type football in the first 15 games of the season than I think they wanted to by design. So I'm curious to see just how that changes because you got the one thing that is interesting about this 4-week break. You can't totally remake yourself, but you can try to hone in on things that, hey, during that first half, we didn't like. And one of the things that Dean Smith said is that, there were a lot of their performances over the course of the first 15 games that they switched off. And while their defense wasn't necessarily overall poor, there were marked moments in games where they switched off, and it led to games getting out of hand. And I think that's something that they're definitely hoping changes when it comes to restarting the second half of the season.
And we get to hang out with you and find out what's going on from the Charlotte perspective. If you would, please, sir, cut the promo as to how folks can listen to you, not just in the midweek as a part of home experiences on streaming services with contracts, but 30 hours a day, 8 days a week, 392 days a year. How do they do it?
Certainly, sir. We will have a big pregame show getting ready for that game tomorrow night, beginning at 7:30, an extended pregame show. I'll have an exclusive chat with Dean Smith on our radio flagship, 92.7 FM, WFNZ, and in stations all across the Carolinas, which will be very nice. I'm actually also hosting today and tomorrow on our flagship station from 3 until 6. You'll be able to hear that conversation with Dean Smith, and also we'll have a chance to chat with Zoran Kaneda as well on not just what's going on with Charlotte FC on the field, what's happening in the boardroom, and how potentially they are working to try and rectify that GAM situation, which is up against it, so to speak. But looking forward to the restart. Looking forward to seeing Mike and Jason in the booth tomorrow night as well. And as I always like to say, I root for you guys aside from twice a year. So hopefully, I saw the game on Friday night in Nashville, and I will say Atlanta, while the scoreline did not indicate it, I will say they looked a heck of a lot better than I had seen from a previous aspect, and the record might indicate.
Yep, defense, and they had the press conference with Junior Alonso and Paulo Diaz yesterday with Chris Henderson, and one of those two should be available in the midweek, and we'll figure it out going forward. Because as you well know, once again, how did you phrase it when it came to the administrative work from overseas and lawyers? How did you phrase it at the beginning? Do you remember?
Inconsistent diplomacy.
There we go.
Inconsistent diplomacy.
There it is. The inconsistent diplomacy is one of the aspects that Atlanta United has to deal with one of the two defensive acquisitions. I know you got to go to practice, so as always, my friend, great to see you. Thanks for batting lead off and getting us on the right path when it comes to Charlotte and Atlanta United coming up in the midweek, sir.
Always love talking to you, John. Thank you.
There we go. It's Will Palaszczuk, everybody. And it's always great to catch up with Willie P. at Willie P. Style on the Twitters, by the way. And it's always good to catch up with him, find out what's going on up the road. I know a lot of you are heading up in that direction because 5-2-2 at home at the bank. And you've also got this all-star thing that's coming up around the corner this time next week. And so it's always going to be great to catch up with Willie P on a bunch of different fronts. But he's heading to practice. And yes, we are talking about practice. Not a game, We're just talking about practice.